Good used to be good enough until folding glass changed the game, which is why Galaxy Z series takes the mobile experience to the next level.
We want to show what you can do with these two amazing devices.
Because once you experience them, you won't go back. Let's take a look at Z Fold 3. Folded is a powerful Galaxy smartphone. And unfolded, it's got a 7.6-inch pixel-perfect AMOLED Infinity Flex display. The screen feels like...
Whoa. Did you feel that?
This is Samsung's just announced Z Fold 3, and I spent some time with it. I'm going to show you how it's easily the greatest foldable phone ever made, with features that will make you want to take your current phone and burn it, but then also how it doesn't really make sense. So the very first thing you notice when you start using the Fold 3 is, good lord, this is a solid piece of equipment. You might remember the first Galaxy Fold. It was kind of revolutionary, but also not exactly structurally sound. Samsung massively improved on that with the Z Fold 2 last year, but I think this is the phone with which they finally delivered on their original premise. It might look familiar, but this phone is, 1, smaller from almost every dimension and a whole 11 grams lighter. It has support for 2 SIM cards instead of 1. All metal on the outside is now made of a new alloy called Armor Aluminium, which they're saying is the strongest material to ever go on a phone. Every hinge movement has been reinforced for snappiness and rigidity, and I'm impressed by how much it feels like a proper tablet when unfolded. It's the only foldable in the world to have proper water resistance, which is especially impressive given that here you've got to worry about not just 2 separate halves, but a hinge, which is purpose-built to have a gap in it. The front and back are now both covered in Gorilla Glass Victus, the toughest glass yet, and the inside panel has a new structure paired with a protective film that will apparently bring an 80% durability improvement. Fair play. I mean, that 80% number obviously is a best case scenario, but even then it's pretty clear that this design concept, this whole small screen on the front and main screen on the inside format, has been somewhat mastered. I do think they've lost a bit of character when compared to the S21 Ultra. Like, this design is such a statement. This one looks kind of generic, but do you know what? It's a folding phone, it's got enough character. We'll let it pass. And thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Plus, this is arguably the most advanced display setup you can get on a smartphone. 2 panels, a 6.2-inch cover screen and a 7.6-inch Infinity Flex screen, both sporting dynamic AMOLED 2X panels with a 120Hz refresh rate. And compared to last year, this inside display now has its selfie camera hidden under the screen. Yep, and it's now 29% brighter. Given that brightness was pretty much the only sore point with the Fold 2 screen, there's not much to complain about here. This hidden camera's not exactly invisible, it's actually really obvious when you're looking for it, but it blends just enough into what you're looking at that, providing it's in your peripheral vision, you can trick yourself into thinking this is just one uninterrupted screen. It's a really good panel, and I think it takes using it in person to fully clock the novelty of being able to have that in a form factor that can actually fit in your pocket. It's powerful, 12 gigs of RAM by default, 256 gigs of fast storage on the base model, and a Snapdragon 888 chip. But probably the most impressive aspect of this, more so than design or screen or power, is the software. There are so many subtle improvements since the first Fold that the entire narrative has changed. This is no longer about just having a bigger screen to, well, make everything bigger. It's about being able to do more. Samsung's clearly gone to great lengths, both internally and with other companies like Google, Microsoft, Spotify, to make sure that when you're using this big inside screen, that you're squeezing every last bit of utility out of that extra real estate. News apps show more info than ever before. YouTube shows more thumbnails before you have to start scrolling. You can have 2 instances of the same app open at once now. I love how the web browser is starting to feel like a fully fledged computer one. I love that I have space for proper tabs up top and how quickly I can open up a new tab without leaving the current one. And what I really respect about Samsung's approach here is that they know foldable phones are still new territory, but instead of locking down and controlling the experience as a result of it, they're instead inviting their users to just experiment with them. There's a group of settings called Labs, where you can set how large you want the window to be for any app, so that even ones that aren't optimized for the unusual aspect ratio will still work as intended. You can configure how apps behave when it comes to multi-window multitasking. You can even use 2 apps stacked on top of each other now. And This is more significant than it seems. I'll give you a weird example. Whenever I play the board game Scrabble, where you have to make words to get points, we always use two phones. One to be the timer phone for each person's turn, and one to check if the words we're actually making are real words. With this, you could just set a timer that can sit in the corner of your screen and comfortably use the rest of the panel for that word checker. There's just too much to talk about here. There's an improved taskbar. There's flex mode, which basically turns your one big screen into two separate screens. And there's cover screen mirroring, which means any change that you make on your inside home screen will now be mapped to the cover screen just for consistency. And they've managed to do all of this stuff whilst effectively knocking off £200 or euros off the price compared to
I'm going to start off with the Galaxy Fold 3. This is their flagship product. It's their flagship foldable. It's the flagship device in their whole Galaxy lineup. And this thing is nice. It's got an updated look. It's got a more modern vibe to it. It's got cleaner lines. It's a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter. When you pick it up, the difference in weight is not super noticeable, but the difference in thickness compared to the Fold 2 is quite obvious. Now inside, we're looking at three relatively big changes this year. The first is the presence of an under-display camera. So this is a camera system that can become somewhat invisible. Secondly is the presence of S Pen support. And then lastly, it's now IPX8 water certified. So I'm gonna start with the camera because that's the coolest thing to me. That under-display camera is tech that we've seen before. This isn't the first phone in the world with it, but this is the first time we've seen it on a Galaxy device, and it's also the first time we've seen it done in this type of form factor. You're basically hiding the camera so that it's as invisible as possible for any kind of media consumption or any kind of use of that front display. Now, the way they do it, if you're unfamiliar with this tech, is that there's just a bunch of pixels above the camera and above the lens, and they can turn it on and off to hide the camera tech that's underneath. The thing is, it's imperfect. Now last year when the Axon 20 came out, this was the first commercially available phone that had the tech built into it, and you could see, if you looked for it, that there was kind of like visual artifacting at the top of the display where that camera was hidden. Now in the Fold 3, there's still a visual artifact in that area, right? If you know what you're looking for and you are looking in the right spot, you'll see it. It's fairly obvious, and it's more noticeable in very bright backgrounds. Like if it's a white background, it's more obvious. It's most obvious then. If it's a darker shade or a darker scene, it's tougher to see it. But if you're looking for it, you'll see it. Now, I was actually a little bit surprised to see that there wasn't much of an improvement in that implementation compared to this one from the past. The other thing to keep in mind is that in order to pull this off, in order for Samsung to have an under-display camera system, they've had to reduce the camera quality of that front-facing camera on that screen, right? I get it, like they're going for a look, but it's just surprising to me that that's what they had to do. And the other thing I was surprised at is the seam. Like ever since the original Galaxy Fold launched, the seam right down the middle was something that people were concerned about, right? How obvious is it? How annoying is it for the user? It doesn't matter to me personally. Like I've never once thought that the visual experience of a foldable phone was ruined by the presence of the seam. It's obvious, it's right in front of your face, but it just exists. That being said, I'm surprised that on a third generation of foldable tech, it still has such an obvious seam. It seemingly has the same degree of seamage as the first one, but maybe that's just the tech. Okay, in terms of the S Pen, so this to me is a really nice addition. You can't use every S Pen that Samsung offers. They have the S Pen Pro, which is compatible with this one, but they also have a dedicated or new S Pen built specifically for the Fold devices. Now it also has this case that you can get that has a detachable kind of pen clip holder, which is kind of neat. And it's now water resistant, which to me is an incredible feat of technology. If you think about what is happening when you open and close this device, like this hinge has so many moving parts. Like last year on the Fold 2, they implemented some brushes to improve the dust resistance, but to make it water resistant to any degree, that's crazy to me. And it's cool because anyone who's ever considered a foldable device, and even in the future, if you ever look at this stuff, it's durability comes into your mind, right? Like how durable is a hinge like this? There's moving parts, and just having water resistance is really nice to see. So it also has Gorilla Glass Victus. It has a matte finish. It's got a stronger aluminum body, like the metal that they've used a little bit stronger than the previous generation. And the whole device is thinner and lighter, but the camera system remains relatively unchanged. Like maybe the software has been tweaked, but in terms of the camera hardware, from what I've seen, it's identical to the previous generation. So if camera image quality is hugely important to you, then you're going to be disappointed. But for people that want the bleeding edge in Galaxy tech with folding screens and under-display cameras, this is going to fit the ticket quite nicely. Now, the pricing is actually a little bit lower than it was in the past. It's now $17.99 at the base model, which is, I don't know, $200 cheaper than it was last gen. It's still super expensive. Like an $1,800 phone is still an $1,800 phone, but it's more accessible than it was last year.
So this is the one I'm more likely to use. It's the Z Fold 3. And holding it for the first time, it does look and feel very similar to the Fold 2. We've seen this look before, but there's some pretty noteworthy improvements here with a bunch of small changes that kind of add up to being worth a new generation. So you've probably already seen the new camera bump. It's smaller than that huge square from last time, and we'll get to those cameras in a second, but everything is just a little tighter and a little more well put together here. New Gorilla Glass Victus on the front. The whole phone is about 2 millimeters thinner, and it's slightly lighter than last year as well. And the hinge, the most important part, is even more tucked into the side of the phone. It doesn't stick out as much. So the whole phone, along with the weight of the hinge, has this feeling of being very firmly well put together. And it's this very satisfying feeling. It's so well put together, in fact, that it's actually, I was surprised to learn it has an IPX8 water resistance rating, which is pretty intense. That means it can survive water from all directions and can actually be immersed in water, which I already know means someone's gonna do an underwater test with it, and I'll probably watch. But that's a pretty big step for a folding phone, isn't it? Now, importantly, that's IPX8, not IP68. So the X means it wasn't tested for like fine granular particles, solid particles. So it's not dust resistant. And that actually makes a lot of sense. That's been the nemesis of these hinges. Just little tiny grains, little particles getting into the hinge and eventually ending up under the screen. But the fact that it's so watertight that they can actually certify it for water resistance is pretty impressive to me. I'm pretty sure that's the first folding phone that we've seen, the first new folding screen type phone that's water resistant. Then another great touch is the cover screen that's on the outside, which is almost exactly the same size and resolution, is now 120 Hertz also to match the inside screen. That I love. Last year on the Fold 2, I never really got over the fact that the 60 Hertz outside screen felt worse than the 120 Hertz inside screen. It made me want to use it less. But now it just kind of feels like a really tall candy bar shaped normal phone with high refresh rate and everything. But let's talk about that big inside screen, shall we? Because this is where we have the most changes. Same size, same bezels and 120 Hertz refresh rate, same dust caps at the top and the bottom. But you notice anything missing from the inside screen? See, last year there was a hole punch camera at the top in the middle of the right-hand side. And if you're looking up there, yeah, this year, that selfie camera has moved to behind the display. Oh yeah, so Fold 3 has an under-display selfie camera inside of a folding display. So I've made an entire video just all about this camera behind the display tech. Boom, I'll also link it below the like button if you want to watch that video. But if you do check it out, it is a really curious new technology. It's a first generation thing. And it definitely has some quirks and some weird things about it, which is why I was kind of surprised actually to see it in, you know, such a premium, high-end, expensive Samsung device. But it's here. Like, it's definitely not invisible by any means. You can clearly see it whenever you look for it, and it exhibits this pixelation through the gaps in the pixels that I talked about in that full video. It's got like this octagon shape of pixels, and everything that passes through that octagon gets really pixelated, especially when it's bright colors and whites, and especially when it's off axis. And most interesting of all, the actual quality of these other first generation selfie cameras I looked at are not great. It would look really hazy in the viewfinder, and then once you snap the photo, it literally runs a defogging algorithm to sharpen up and clean up the picture. And I could actually see that same thing happening here. When I took selfies on the Fold 3, it's a little hazy in the viewfinder, but then you snap the picture and then you look at the picture fast enough, you can literally see that processing snap the contrast in, get rid of that haze, but it's still not that great of a picture. So it's interesting that it is, I mean, I'm excited to get my hands on this phone longer term for the full review, but also to see what kind of photo quality and video quality that this actually produces, to see how much worse it actually is than the hole punch camera that came before it. But yeah, I think if you ask Samsung why they did this, I think their logic would be that this is the least important or least used selfie camera on the Fold. Like you already have on the new Fold, you'll have a selfie hole punch camera on the cover display. And then if you really want a high quality selfie, well, you can open it up and point those cameras at yourself and use the viewfinder as a nice selfie shot. So this inside selfie camera, it's not really used all that much, maybe for video calls sometimes, or just a very quick, convenient thing. So they figured this was Samsung's place to take a little bit of a risk with some bleeding edge tech to give us the full corner-to-corner expansive inside screen we've wanted since the beginning. Sure, you can still see the camera sometimes and it's not perfect, but hey, it is better technically than a hole punch. But my favorite inside screen improvement here is that the foldable glass protective film is 80% more durable against scratch resistance, meaning they've finally made the Fold S Pen compatible. Now this is all great, and we love the headlines. Obviously this is very exciting for people who wanted the bigger canvas for the note taking and all that, but this definitely comes with an asterisk that I think we should consider, okay? Not to pour water on this fire or whatever, but think about it. Yes, the Fold is gonna be clearly great for note taking, sketching. Maybe it's just straight up just as good as the Note at everything it did. It's got all the same S Pen features, and it's a super responsive 120 Hertz panel. All that is great. But this is like a special case of an S Pen for this phone, okay? First of all, you need literally a special S Pen. It's a new one called the S Pen Fold Edition, and it looks like a normal S Pen, but it has a softer retractable tip, so you can't apply too much pressure. That could still damage the screen. And it's of course still an optional accessory. So you also need to buy an optional case to carry it around with the Fold, unless you want to have them both loose in your pocket. And other styluses generally aren't going to work. I mean, there are some big soft tip styluses if you just want to replace your finger as an input device, but most pens for writing and sketching and all that good stuff are not soft tipped. They're not retractable tipped. So I even got a warning on the screen that says, only use S Pens designed for your Galaxy Fold. Other S Pens, or other styluses for that matter, may damage the screen. Which brings me to the only other option for this phone, which is a brand new, much bigger S Pen Pro that has to be set to Z Fold mode, which is literally a physical switch on top of the pen that makes the tip retract more easily and with less pressure. But that's it. Now the S Pen Pro, it actually is pretty cool, and unlike the Fold Edition, it is active, it's got a battery, it charges via USB Type-C, but it also has onboard memory, so you can copy and paste stuff between different Samsung devices, like if you have a Samsung tablet or a laptop. That sounds super cool. But this is all specialized workarounds to loop in the Galaxy Fold into the S Pen world. So at the end of the day, if you've got to go the extra mile to buy the S Pen and buy the case to carry it around in, well then you can do all that and you can bring the S Pen into your life. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I think Samsung should keep around the Galaxy Note. Fold has a new set of triple cameras, like I mentioned, an ultra-wide, a standard, and a 2x telephoto, and a flash, right in line with the tamed down stuff we usually see here in the Fold, and I think they'll probably hold up in the full review, but we'll see. And there's a bunch of pretty sweet new software features that make this phone even more of a multitasking monster. I already always felt like super productive anytime I use the Fold, and now there's a new lab section in the settings where you can like force every app to work in multitasking for custom aspect ratios. And my favorite tweak, those slide over apps from the side, you can now permanently pin over to the right-hand side of the phone like a dock. Like just straight up like a dock, like a desktop operating system. And so then your shortcuts just live over there all the time, kind of like the dock in Mac OS X or in Windows. It can shuffle around your most recent apps. It's really useful for copying and pasting between apps or moving back and forth between things. Hopping your app drawer anytime from over there, unpin it anytime you want to. Very nice.
This is the thing that I've missed. I can't wait to get back to and get the SIM card back in, because this is just, it's a lot of fun. I mean, you just boot up some YouTube or something. If you spend any amount of time in like this experience of having all this real estate, and let me just show you what I'm talking about with the audio. Listen to this. This viewing experience right here on the OLED.
Like that, we're back.
I mean, it really feels like you've got a tablet that can also go in your pocket and also be a phone if you need it to. And it's truly unique in that sense. Look at this. I mean, I realize you can do multitasking on other phones, but you just don't have the form factor to truly take advantage of it. If I flip back fold back into this orientation, then I have comments. So I can be watching up top, looking at comments down below. When it comes to content consumption, this thing truly comes into its own. Oh, I see how they're doing it. So the camera area is still the location where you're keeping, you know, your clock and your battery life and things like this. So tabs will open up underneath that portion. But if I go this way, that's where the front-facing camera no longer becomes a significant obstruction. Previously, you would have had a giant hole punch there, but now with this new tech, instead it just looks like sort of a little tiny grid pattern. But I think over time, you're going to stop even noticing that, and it's going to be less of a distraction than the hole punch would be. So it's cool to see this technology implemented, especially in a device like this, which is so centered on content consumption and immersion. As far as fancy tricks go on this one, if I did the same task, open up YouTube, it's obviously a much different experience here, because if I go scroll, I can still have a video and scroll here. It's super tall. The video portion itself is quite small, but it also depends on the aspect ratio of the video. Keep that in consideration. This show is 16:9. Look at the expression right there. What a pause. That's quite a pause. Look at the expression. So the best part here is you get big smartphone experience, but you can do this. You can just bam and have a tiny smartphone in your pocket. Big smartphone experience, tiny smartphone in a pocket. This is small tablet experience and regular size smartphone in the pocket. The last time that I used this device as the daily driver, I noticed I ended up using this display a lot when I was out, and then when I had a little bit like a moment to relax or something, or I needed to get more comprehensive stuff done, then I'm going to this display here. And it was a huge improvement over the first generation when they went with the bigger exterior display, which truly made it function like a typical smartphone with a typical screen size without the need to unfold it. Okay, now another thing that struck me pretty much right away, especially when comparing this model to the previous generation, is how much work Samsung has done on the hinge mechanism. So obviously a big component, the most important component on a folding device, is this hinge that makes it all possible. And of course, we've seen the exploded views in the past of how many individual pieces and variety of mechanical aspects, how much of that goes into this hinge section. But I noticed right away when opening and closing this thing, it is absolutely a step above what was happening on the previous model. This one now can stop at any point. So it's a little bit less flimsy and feels more robust through its entirety of opening and closing. It reminds me of one of these car doors that you would have on like a luxury vehicle that can stop at any point, as opposed to continuing to swing to only like 2 or 3 points along the way. And I'm wondering if this new construction has anything to do with this enhanced IP rating as well that they've been able to put into this device. And then also, like, where does that play into the overall weight of the device? Because somehow they were able to create a more satisfying and solid feeling hinge, but then they were also able to drop the weight ever so slightly. So that's kind of a nice combination. It just feels to me like you're dealing with a device that is not first generation anymore. You're dealing with a device here where they have learned from the previous models and taken what they've learned and then applied it. And that's the nice thing about new form factors. There's so much room to grow and to figure things out as you have success along the way. And I do expect Samsung to continue to have success with this model, because now you've also got the pen input to go with it, which is something that a lot of people wanted and could be a compelling characteristic, like a compelling feature for them to step up to it. Now, as far as that front-facing camera, this image here is kind of probably the best illustration you can get as to how it hides when you're looking at it straight on, but then it's kind of still there if you're really looking for it. The video overemphasizes the existence of it, but I would say at first glance here, it is an improvement and less distracting than the hole punch equivalent.
Let's start with the Z Fold 3, since it carries over an important part of the Galaxy Note's legacy, the S Pen. Yes, you can now use a stylus on that giant screen for drawing, taking notes, touching up your photos, editing PDFs, annotating screenshots, and everything else that people use the S Pen for. Samsung made a special Fold edition of the S Pen that you can use for the basics, but the pricier S Pen Pro will also work if you want extra features like air gestures and some Bluetooth tricks. Both are sold separately from the Fold 3. But hang on a minute. See, if you followed along with Samsung's foldables, you might know that their screens are a little, shall we say, delicate? A fingernail could leave a permanent mark on the previous Fold screen. So how are you supposed to use the S Pen without leaving marks all over the place? Samsung claims the protective film covering the ultra-thin glass is now 80% more durable. So hopefully that'll be enough to avoid problems. The Fold Edition S Pen also has an auto-retracting tip that'll pull back if you're using too much force when pressing the stylus on the Fold screen. Now, I spent some time with the Z Fold 3 today and pressed down pretty hard with the S Pen and didn't see any marks.